The pounding on my door was not knocking. It was a fist trying to break wood, 3 heavy strikes, then a 4th that cracked the top hinge. I grabbed the iron bar from beside the fireplace before I even reached the door, because on this planet, nothing pounds like that, unless it is running from something worse than itself. "Open it or lose it," a woman's voice shouted from outside, sharp and breathless, layered under the scream of wind. I threw the bar off the frame and pulled the door in, and 3 women fell through it together, soaked, bleeding at the edges, armor scratched down to bare metal in places. Behind them, past the swirling snow, something moved between the trees that was taller than my roof. I did not wait to admire it. I slammed the door shut and dropped the bar back across the frame with both hands, and something enormous hit the other side of that door, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. The 3 women scrambled back from the door on instinct, weapons already up, aimed at wood that was groaning under a second impact. "It will not break that," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Iron core, stone frame, built it myself." The tallest of the 3, dark hair pulled back tight, a long pale scar cutting across one eyebrow, turned to look at me like she was deciding whether I was lying. Her eyes were a deep amber color, sharp and quick, moving over the door, the walls, the shuttered windows, and finally back to me. "You are certain," she said. It was not really a question. "I am certain because I am still alive to tell you," I said. The thing outside hit the door a 3rd time, and this time the whole cabin shuddered, but the frame held. A long, furious sound rolled through the walls, something between a roar and a screech, and then, slowly, the vibration through the floor began to fade as heavy footsteps moved away into the storm. Nobody spoke until the footsteps were gone completely. Then the youngest of the 3, a woman with short red hair and a fresh cut along her jaw, let out a shaking breath and sat straight down on my floor, like her legs had simply stopped working. "We are not dead," she said, sounding almost surprised about it. "Not yet," said the 3rd woman, older, with gray streaks through dark braided hair, lowering her weapon but keeping it in her hand. "Not dead is not the same as safe." I set the iron bar down slowly, keeping my hands visible, because 3 armed strangers in my home was not a situation I wanted to make worse with sudden movements. "My name is Owen," I said. "This is my cabin. You are welcome to the fire and whatever food I have, but I would like to know what is chasing you before it decides to try my roof." The tall one with the scar studied me a moment longer, then finally lowered her own blade. "Vakara," she said, "these are Talia and Ronwyn. We are Huntresses of the Ashvale line. That creature outside is a Drefna, an alpha, the largest I have tracked in 3 seasons. It killed 2 of our sisters 4 days ago. We have been running from it and hunting it ever since." "You were hunting something that big with 3 people?" I asked. "We started with 6, Vakara said, and something in her voice closed the subject before I could ask what happened to the other 3. I moved to the fireplace and built the flames higher, filling the kettle, pulling down what dried meat and bread I had stored for the season. My hands were steady doing familiar work, even though my heart was still slamming against my ribs from the sound of that thing hitting my door. The storm outside was not slowing. If anything, it was getting worse. Wind screaming past the shutters like something alive, snow hissing against the walls in waves. Nobody was going back out into that, not with an alpha Drefna somewhere in the dark. "You will need to stay until this clears," I said, setting cups of hot water and dried herb near the fire for them. "There is no path through that storm, and there is definitely no path through that storm with a monster still hunting the area." Talia, the youngest, wrapped both hands around her cup like she was trying to remember how warmth worked. "You are not afraid of us," she said quietly. 3 armed strangers broke into your home, and you are making us tea." "I am plenty afraid," I said honestly. "I am just more useful when I do something with my hands instead of standing still and shaking." That earned a small, surprised laugh from her, quickly swallowed when Ronwyn shot her a look. Vakara did not laugh. She sat near the fire with her blade across her knees, watching the door like the Drefna might change its mind and come back through it. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders squared, every part of her still ready to fight, even though her body was clearly exhausted, plated leather scratched and torn, One boot nearly split open at the seam. "You should eat," I told her. "Even hunters need fuel." "I will eat when the door is secure," she said. "The door is secure. I built this cabin to survive worse storms than this one, and that iron bar has held against ice bears twice its size. You can trust the wood, at least for tonight." She looked at me again with that same measuring expression, like she was deciding how much of what I said was worth believing. Then, slowly, she set the blade down across her lap instead of gripping it, and reached for the food I had offered. We ate mostly in silence for a while, the fire cracking, wind screaming outside, the tension in the room easing by degrees as warmth returned to their hands and food filled their stomachs. Ronwyn fell asleep first, sitting upright against the wall, weapon still loosely in her grip. Talia followed not long after, curled near the fire like she had forgotten how to be anything but exhausted. Vakara stayed awake, watching the door, watching me, watching the shuttered windows every time the wind gusted hard enough to rattle them. "You should sleep too," I said. "I will keep watch." "I do not sleep well in strange places," she said. "This cabin has stood through 6 winters," I said. "It is not going to fall apart tonight just because you close your eyes." She almost smiled at that, just barely, the scar above her eyebrow shifting slightly with the motion. "You speak like a man who has survived a great deal." "I speak like a man who has spent 6 years alone on a planet that tries to kill him on a regular basis," I said. "You learn to sound confident, even when you are terrified, because the alternative gets you eaten." That earned a real laugh this time, quiet and short, but real. "That is good advice," she said. "I will remember it." We talked for a long while after that, low voices under the noise of the storm, careful not to wake the other two. She told me about the Ashvale line, about how Huntresses were the ones who tracked and fought on her world, while the men tended the villages and raised the young, a reversal of roles that had taken me months to understand when I first arrived on this planet. She told me about her sisters, the 2 who had died 4 days ago, killed by the same Drefna that had just tried to break down my door, and there was a rawness in her voice when she spoke about them that told me the wound was still fresh. I told her about Earth, about why I had come out here, about the quiet, solitary life I had built for myself in this cabin, because solitude was easier than the noise I had left behind. She listened carefully, asking questions in a way that told me she was actually curious, not just making conversation to pass the time. Somewhere in that conversation, the fear in the room faded into something else, something quieter and warmer, though neither of us named it out loud. The storm broke sometime near morning, the wind dropping from a scream to a low moan, the snow slowing to a gentle drift outside the shutters. Talia and Ronwyn woke stiff and sore but alive, and the mood in the cabin shifted immediately from survival to practical planning. "We need to find the Drefna's trail again before the fresh snow buries every track," Ronwyn said, already checking her weapon, her voice all business now that daylight was near. "It will be resting," Vakara said. "A creature that large does not run all night without needing to recover. If we move now, quietly, we may catch it before it wakes fully." "You are going back out there," I said. It was not really a question, but it came out sounding like one anyway. "It killed 2 of my sisters," Vakara said simply. "I swore an oath. That does not end because one storm passed." I understood the logic, even as something in my chest tightened at the thought of them walking back into danger that size. I had spent 6 years being alone out here, careful, cautious, avoiding exactly the kind of confrontation they were walking toward on purpose. "Then I am coming with you," I said, before I had fully decided to say it. All 3 women turned to look at me at once. Talia's eyebrows shot up. Ronwyn's expression stayed carefully neutral, though her eyes narrowed slightly. Vakara simply studied me, that same measuring look from the night before, like she was recalculating something. "This is not your fight," she said. "It became my fight the moment it tried to break down my door," I said. "Besides, I know this land better than you do. I have lived on it for 6 years. I know where the ground is soft, where the ice cracks, where the Drefna herds usually den for the winter. You are hunting blind out here. I am not." She held my gaze for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind her amber eyes, some decision settling into place. "Then you will stay behind me," she said finally. "And you will do exactly as I say." "Agreed," I said, and meant it. We moved out an hour later, once the last of the storm had cleared enough to see clearly. The world outside was blinding white, snow piled high against the tree line, but the Drefna's tracks were still visible. Massive prints sunk deep into the drifts, each one nearly the size of my chest. Vakara led, moving low and fast, reading the ground the way I might read a familiar book. Ronwyn took the rear, watching our backs. Talia stayed close to me, occasionally pointing out details in the tracks that told her things I could not see: the depth of a print, the spacing between strides, the direction the weight had shifted. "It is favoring its right side," Talia murmured, crouching beside one particularly deep print. "Something wounded it before it reached your cabin." "Good," Vakara said from ahead, not turning. "Wounded things tire faster." We followed the trail for nearly 2 hours, deeper into the tree line than I had ever gone alone, the terrain growing rougher, rockier, the trees thinning out toward a ridge I recognized from trading trips years ago. I knew what lay beyond that ridge, a wide frozen basin, where the ice was thin in places, cracked and treacherous, even in the coldest months. "There is a basin past that ridge," I said quietly. "The ice out there is unstable. If it goes that way, we should not follow it onto the ice directly." Vakara paused, studying the terrain ahead, then nodded slowly. "Then we will not chase it onto the ice. We will wait for it to come to us instead, somewhere the ground favors us, and not it." We found a position along a rocky outcrop overlooking the basin, high enough to see across the frozen expanse, close enough to the tree line to retreat if needed. Vakara arranged us carefully, Ronwyn on one flank, Talia on the other, herself and me in the center, where the Drefna's likely path would bring it closest. We waited nearly an hour in the cold before we heard it. A low rumbling growl carried on the wind, followed by the crunch of enormous footsteps breaking through frozen ground. Then it appeared at the tree line across the basin, massive, dark-furred, antlers like broken branches catching the pale morning light, one front leg dragging slightly with each stride, exactly as Talia had predicted. "There," Vakara breathed, already rising into a crouch, weapon steady in her hands. "Ronwyn, Talia, when it commits to the basin, drive it toward the rocks. Owen, stay behind me no matter what happens." The Drefna moved onto the ice slowly, testing each step, some primal caution keeping it from rushing despite its size. Ronwyn and Talia broke from cover at Vakara's signal, moving fast along the flanks, shouting, throwing stones, driving the creature's attention toward the rocky outcrop where we waited. It worked exactly as planned for the first few seconds. The Drefna turned, snarling, moving faster toward the rocks, away from the thinning ice near the center of the basin. Then it stopped moving entirely, head snapping up, nostrils flaring, and turned directly toward where Vakara and I were crouched. "It has your scent," Vakara said, her voice tight but controlled. "Do not move." The creature took one heavy step toward us, then another, ignoring Ronwyn and Talia's shouts entirely, drawn instead by something it had caught on the wind, something that made it forget the trap being built around it. I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that it had caught my scent, unfamiliar to this land, different from the Huntresses it had been fighting for days. "Run," Vakara said quietly. "Now, back toward the tree line. I will hold its attention." "I am not leaving you alone with that thing," I said. "You are not a hunter," she said, eyes never leaving the Drefna as it took another slow step closer. "You will get yourself killed, and me along with you trying to protect you. Run." The Drefna let out a low, rolling growl, weight shifting forward, muscles bunching beneath dark fur, and I understood in that moment that it was about to charge, and that Vakara, wounded leg or not on the creature's part, was standing directly in its path with nothing but a blade and raw determination. I did not run. Instead, I grabbed a heavy stone from the ground beside me and hurled it as hard as I could toward the creature's flank, shouting at the top of my lungs, drawing its attention away from Vakara for one critical second. The Drefna's head snapped toward me, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought I had made a fatal mistake, its full attention now locked entirely on me, instead of splitting between two targets. Then it charged, straight at me, faster than something that size had any right to move, snow exploding beneath its heavy paws. Vikara moved faster. She came in low and fast from its exposed flank, blade flashing, striking hard at the leg it had already been favoring, and the creature's charge broke into a stumbling, roaring collapse, front legs buckling as its weight came down wrong on the wounded limb. Ronwyn and Talia closed in immediately from both sides, weapons finding their marks with practiced precision, and within moments the massive creature had gone still, its long fight finally over. Silence settled over the basin, broken only by our own ragged breathing and the soft hiss of wind across the ice. Vikara straightened slowly, blade lowered, chest heaving, and turned to look at me with an expression I could not immediately read. "You should have run," she said, though there was no real anger in it. "You would have died if I had," I said. "It had you as its next target the second it lost interest in me." She crossed the distance between us in a few quick strides, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be angry, but instead, she simply reached out and gripped my shoulder firmly, studying my face like she was checking for injuries I had not noticed myself. "That was reckless," she said quietly. "So was standing alone in front of an alpha Drefna," I said. The corner of her mouth curved upward, just slightly, the same almost smile from the night before. "We are both reckless then." Talia and Ronwyn were already moving to confirm the kill, their voices carrying relief and quiet triumph across the basin, the oath finally fulfilled after 4 days of running and fighting and losing sisters along the way. Vikara did not move away from me immediately. She stayed close, her hand still resting on my shoulder, amber eyes studying me with an intensity that had nothing to do with checking for wounds anymore. "Among my people," she said slowly, "when someone stands between a huntress and death without being asked, without being bound by any oath to do so, there is a meaning to that, a very old meaning." "I was not thinking about old meanings," I said. "I was thinking about not wanting you to die." "I know," she said. "That is exactly why the meaning applies." She did not explain further in that moment, though I would learn the full weight of that custom in the weeks that followed, once the Ashvale line had properly honored their fallen, and the Drefna's threat to the region had finally ended. For now, she simply let her hand slide from my shoulder down to my wrist, fingers closing gently but firmly around it, the same way she might grip something she intended to keep close. It was not a demand. It was not even really a claim in the way I first understood the word. It felt more like a door quietly closing between two people who had spent one long, dangerous night and one longer, more dangerous morning, discovering something neither of them had expected to find out here in the snow and the cold and the roar of a dying storm. We walked back toward my cabin together as the sun finally broke fully over the ridge, Ronwyn and Talia trailing behind, already talking about how they would tell this story to the rest of the Ashvale line, about the man who built walls strong enough to hold back a monster, and who then walked straight into danger anyway when someone he barely knew needed him. I did not know then everything that gripping my wrist would come to mean. I only knew that the storm had brought 3 huntresses to my door in fear and desperation, and that somewhere between the fire and the fight, and the long quiet hours in between, one of them had decided, without a single word of explanation, that she was not leaving again. And for the first time in 6 long, solitary years on this planet, I found that I did not want her to.